Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. You should never really be happy with a defeat, of course not, especially when it opens up that 9-point gap again to the top four. Chelsea obviously winning, United winning, Sheffield United as well, didn't they? They won on Friday night. So of course, never ever should be happy with a defeat. That would just be weird. However, what I would say, the match against Liverpool yesterday was certainly not the game I think many people expected. And despite the result, I think there were quite a few positives to come out of it. And most importantly for me, I don't know about anyone else, but for me, I could kind of see a way forward. I could kind of see what Mourinho's kind of thinking is. And I maybe haven't been able to see that in a lot of the games since. I think a lot of that came with the free week he had before. According to the players, they did a lot of work, and Mourinho said as well, he did a lot of work on the week in various aspects, particularly defensively. And I felt, other than the goal, obviously, which was, again, another lapse of concentration, I felt the defending was really, really good against, there's no beating around the bush, arguably the best team in the world right now. Well, technically they won the World Club Cup or whatever it's called nowadays. So they are officially the best team in the world. And despite all of their attacking riches, Firmino, Mane, Salah, I didn't really feel that Spurs were massively troubled in terms of Gazzaniga had a couple of saves to make, but actually not too many. He was protected pretty well. And most interestingly is that Mourinho had said a couple of weeks back that he knew how to do that, but it would detract from Spurs' attacking kind of qualities. But actually, Spurs created a lot of chances. Second half especially. First half was a bit of a strange one. It was more geared towards the defending, and the attacking was more counter-attacking stuff. Whereas second half, really felt that Spurs kind of went on took the front foot and actually took the game as they had to Liverpool. And had they had someone that could actually put the ball in the net, the scoreline could have been absolutely different. You could have been looking at. I know obviously Firmino hit the post as well in the first half, but you could have seen a game with far more goals, maybe a point for either side, and even possibly Spurs, nicking the win. It was a defeat, but I actually did feel there was plenty to kind of, take from it, I think is probably the best way to put it. Let's start with probably the biggest positive of the day for me, and that was young Japhet Tanganga. I've been very fortunate because of my position to be able to watch a lot of Japhet over the last three or so years, playing for the under-23s, the under-19s, a few under-18 games as well back at the start. And, anyone, there's a lot of people out there who watch these academy games as well, and anyone could tell you he's a talented lad. He's comfortable on the ball, very composed, pace. He's got a real aerial presence about him, and that's at the other side of the pitch as well. It was quite interesting. Whenever Spurs had a corner or attacking free kick, they left Tanganga back as the last man because of his pace. But actually, he's an incredible weapon to have in the other box. He is, the amount of goals I've seen him score. I remember him scoring a cracking goal against Real Madrid in the UEFA Youth League, absolutely powering home a header. He can do it, and I've seen him do it a few times. So I get why they did it, but actually they were probably missing out on maybe something even more important he could have brought to the team. But yeah, I thought he was superb. I thought what was really interesting as well, and I've said this before, maybe more about Troy Parrott, is that I just kind of felt yesterday the crowd were energised just by having a new homegrown young player that everyone's wanted to see play, because he was brilliant in pre-season. And against Colchester, I felt he was one of the few in the Carabao Cup to actually kind of shine, really. They didn't score, did they, Colchester? Other than obviously the penalties. But I kind of felt that there was just this better atmosphere. And obviously there's other elements. It's a rematch of the Champions League final. It's a massive match. It was a near sellout crowd. But I just felt that even from before kickoff, when they read out his name, just minutes before kickoff, there was a massive cheer. The biggest cheer out of any of the players got was for Tanganga. And within about 60 seconds of the kickoff, he leapt up and won a big header to kind of assert his authority on that back line. And it just kind of got the crowd going. Plenty of interceptions. That I was saying, Firmino hitting the post in the build-up to that. Tanganga had actually blocked his first shot, which had beaten Gazaniga. What was exciting to see is that as well as making these big tackles, these big blocks, he was also very comfortable in striding out with the ball. There were a few times he ran over the opposition half, the halfway line to the opposition half. He's a very technically good young guy. You know, he's 20. I think he's 21. Not too long actually, but obviously very young in terms of experience. Premier League debut. And I thought he absolutely smashed it. I thought it was really exciting. One of those moments where probably a lot of fans are thinking, why has he not had a chance earlier? Especially with the troubles that Tottenham have had at the back and some of their woeful performances and individual errors. He was superb. He was obviously, the one downside was the goal. I wouldn't say it started off as his fault. I felt obviously it was a wrongly given throw-in to Liverpool, but Spurs switched off. They were all too annoyed at the fact that the throw-in shouldn't have gone Liverpool's way. Aurier, obviously, in the first place, he was annoyed at the throw. Winks as well. Everyone kind of switched off, and I felt Tanganga, he obviously played his part in it, but for me, I think it would be incredibly harsh in terms of, I think Firmino, it was such a clever turn, and it's a turn that he'll have done to many, many experienced Premier League players. It's something he'll learn from, obviously, Tanganga. It was something he'll take into whenever his next game is, hopefully soon, and we'll come to that in a moment. But I thought it was just so promising, and it's lovely to come away from a match for the fans, I'd imagine, but also as a journalist, being able to write about a different player, especially one that I've seen so much of over the years and just kind of been waiting for him to get this chance. I thought he was excellent. It was one of the best. I was saying to someone in the press box, I think it was, for me, one of the best debuts I've seen from a homegrown player at Spurs. I was trying to think back, certainly in my recent memory. I thought he was superb, and if you're going to have your Premier League debut, to have it against the best team in the world right now, I just felt he took to it like a duck to water. He's a Premier League player. Mourinho was asked about it afterwards, and when he was talking about new signings, he was saying Tanganga is a new signing. You know, this is his first Premier League game, and he's proved he's a Premier League player. And he said, really, he was exactly right. You know, Mane and Salah before the game might not have known who Tanganga was. They probably didn't. He says now they know, because he had them, he had most of them. Other than that Firmino moment, he had most of them in his pocket. It was a massive performance. And that kind of leads me on to where I was going with that in terms of that back three for me. Why not make that the future going forward? Why not? I loved the fact that in two fell swoops, in bringing Sanchez and Tanganga into this team, Mourinho transformed what was a really slow, creaking defence. We had Alderweireld, Dyer and Vertonghen. And anytime anyone with any pace went at them, they were stuffed. Suddenly, you had two quick players either side of, an organiser, a composed guy in Alderweireld in the middle, just signed his new deal, so he's set for the future. For me, that back three was pretty exciting. I thought Sanchez, obviously Tanganga's debut will get a lot of the kind of buzz and the headlines, but I thought Sanchez was superb. There was one moment, I think it was Firmino, when he slid into this last gasp challenge and then stood up and took the ball away. It was a bit like that, that Bobby Moore challenge in the 1970 World Cup that you'll see a lot. I think it was against Brazil, wasn't it? It was very reminiscent of that, and I thought he had a brilliant game. I thought Alderweireld played very well as well. And I think that back three unit, if you just probably get better fullbacks, if I'm going to be really brutal, put two better fullbacks, because I thought Rose had a really poor game. Once again, I thought he looked like a player that hasn't started a Premier League game since October. And Aurier, we'll have a little chat about in a minute. I thought he was much better than Rose, but there's still little drawbacks when it comes to Aurier for me. But I felt that back three is a solid unit. It had a lovely balance to it. Even though Sanchez was playing on the wrong side, Tanganga can actually play on the left. We saw him switch over to the left later in the game when Rose came off. But I like that a lot. I'd like to see that going forward, and I'd love to see Mourinho actually now pick that back three for a sustained run of matches. Give them that kind of experience of playing alongside each other. I think Alderweireld's played alongside Tanganga, certainly in pre-season. He played some of the games, and I think that's got a real chance of being a unit. I really liked it. Let's talk about Serge Aurier, because I hate to always be down on a certain player because I did feel yesterday he had some really good moments, mainly attacking. His cross for Lo Celso at the end was it was a superb cross. Absolutely should have been put in the net. It was a superb cross, and he did some good things. And I think Mourinho gave him a role yesterday. It was technically a back three, back five, whatever you want to call it. But in essence, for most of the game, it was a back four with Aurier right up the pitch as a winger slash at times almost another midfielder because he was going infield so much. There were times when he was doing his, I'm a number 10 thing that he does as well. There were also times when he wasn't bothering to track back. There were the jogs back, the slow walk backs, the watching everyone else doing the work things that I think frustrate everyone. But what I felt with him, and I think this is key, and this is for me why, although it was an improved performance, it's still not good enough. In that someone said, and it was a very well thought out tweet, and it was quite right when looking at the match. They tweeted me because I didn't give him, I'm trying to remember what I gave him. I think I gave him a 5 in my ratings, which obviously a lot of people felt it was much improved, and rightly so. Everyone has their opinions, and that's great. That's football. And this one person said, and it was a perfectly legitimate tweet, said, but the whole point was with Aurier was that he looked much better. He was freed up of his defensive duties, and he did a really good job. And that's quite right. On the day, I kind of agree with that. But my issue with that is why should your right back be better when they're freed of defensive duties? That doesn't make sense to me. If you're not going to play him as a right back and he is going to be a right winger, play a right winger there. Play someone that has the ability to beat a man, put in the assists, score goals, all of that. Aurier, has shown signs that he can do little bits of that, but ultimately he's a right back who people want to take defensive duties off of him. And for me, that's the kind of whole problem, if you see what I mean. I don't want to dig him out, and I hate the fact that Serge Aurier's name probably comes up quite a lot. But that for me is the crux of it all. It would be the same if it was a left back, It would be the same if even young Ryan Sessegnon, if you were trying to give Ryan Sessegnon a left back or a left wing back role, but we don't want him to defend, then don't have a defender in that role. It doesn't matter if it's Serge Aurier, it doesn't matter who it is. That logic for me, I think that needs to be fixed and tweaked. And like I say, if you get 2 better fullbacks in those roles, and I think suddenly you've got an incredibly balanced back line. And it'll be interesting to see where he goes with that now. Talking of other people, Christian Eriksen. I felt there was a bit of a sadness, to be honest. You probably have all seen what happened at the end of the match. It may have been absolutely nothing. It may have been something. What happened was Eriksen, who's probably not one to go off to the crowd too much, especially recently. He certainly did a lot in the past, but he got a bit of stick yesterday during the game when he was substituted. There were it was kind of a bit of a mixed response to it as well. But at the end of the game, he made a real point of coming over to the corner where the South Stand meets the West Stand, because I think it was a young lady with a Denmark flag, and he came over to her and gave her his shirt. And then rather than kind of heading back across the pitch or onto the pitch, he kind of did this walk along the touchline, waving at everyone as he went. And obviously, with the speculation, certainly Inter Milan seem to be quite close to agreeing a contract with him, and are also keen on bringing him in this month to ensure Conte's men win the Serie A. It may well have been a farewell, but what was sad for me was the fact that after everything he's done over the years, if that's the performance that everyone remembers him for as his final game, I'm not entirely sure it would be the final game, but if it was, that would be really sad, because Eriksen gets a lot of hate at the moment. A lot of people have kind of turned on him because, he wanted to leave their football club. And we know how football fans' minds work. I certainly, I remember the days back in the past when there were players that would leave, and it's certainly, you'd really hold it against them. But I think with Eriksen, it's just coincided with this massive drop-off in his form as well. And I think if you have a player that said, I'd like a new challenge, but they're still absolutely smashing it for the club, you kind of forgive it a bit. But because his form's kind of gone off a cliff in the last 12 months or so, it just really has created this kind of awkward atmosphere around him. And it would be a massive shame, because if you look at the 5 years or so before that, What a player, honestly. One of Tottenham's best, one of the Premier League's best. He really was. So we'll see what happens with him. I don't want to dwell on him too much. We've talked about Eriksen quite a lot before, but I just feel, yeah, like I said, a little bit of sadness about it all. But let's talk about positives. Back to positives. He was replaced. Lo Celso and Lamela came on. I thought once again the two guys made an impact. The Argentinian dynamic duo. They came on. They lifted the aggression of the team. They lifted the drive. I thought Lo Celso came straight on. He slammed into a sliding tackle, didn't he, that set up a break where Son really should have done better. Hit the ball over the bar. I think Lo Celso, I really hope Spurs move to make that transfer a permanent one. Get it done, get his future sorted, because for me, he's shown some real signs of being a proper Premier League player. I think he can be. I think he's got the aggression. I hope he starts against Middlesbrough in the week, because I think he just needs more and more game time. And I think he can play the Eriksen deeper role that he's been playing recently alongside a Winks or a Dyer type, or he can play further up the pitch. And I think it would be a big loss to Tottenham if they were to let him go back to Betis and someone else comes in for him, because I think he's only 23. I think he's got a really big future ahead of him. And I think he's still settling and adapting to a new league, but I've seen more than enough to suggest that he could really be a very, very good player for Tottenham Hotspur. Lamela does what Lamela did, got in Liverpool's faces, should have probably scored a goal himself. He had one shot where he just kind of curled it straight at Alisson. But again, another one who I want to see starting matches. I think he needs the minutes under his belt. I know he was out for a while, but he's had like a few 20-minute, half an hour performances now, and I think he needs to get starts because I felt at the start of the season, I think he was very similar to the start of last season. I think there's a guy that just wants to play matches, and he just kind of hasn't been able to, partly because of his injuries and partly because others maybe are just chosen ahead of him. But yeah, he needs to get that rhythm. Ahead of them, Son, Ali, Lucas. I thought Lucas was the pick of the bunch. I thought Son had another one of those quite quiet games, bit of a wasteful game. Ali, I thought first half was pretty poor. Second half, absolutely left nothing, kind of came off with everything left on the pitch. I felt he gave everything second half. He might not have had the quality, but if you look at what he was doing out there, he was covering so many different positions, and it sometimes goes unnoticed. But again, his quality has certainly dipped in recent weeks since the kind of initial boom. I thought Lucas had a good game. Sorry, sounded like Bruce Forsyth there. I thought he played well. I still think that sometimes he's a bit like one of those wind-up toys, where you kind of wind it up and then you let it go and it goes off in this one direction. It can't deviate from it. I do feel sometimes he will just run into a bank of players. Although there was one really good time where he actually chose to pass, and I think it was Son, and Son wasted a chance. So he's got so much threat about him. He works so hard, incredibly hard worker, flings himself around. But yeah, just a little bit more diversity to his play, and I think you unlock how good Lucas Moura could be. Let's talk about transfers. We've kind of captured most of the match, haven't we? I think transfers, right. So Gedson Fernandes, very young 21-year-old. I think he only turned 21 maybe Thursday, very recently. Benfica midfielder. From everything I'm hearing, you've read it elsewhere, so it's not exactly strikingly brand new news or anything. He's very close. He's edging towards a loan agreement with Spurs with an option down the line to make it a permanent one. He's had a really good season last year for Benfica. Was a near ever present for them, despite his age. He's very versatile. I think I'm loath to compare him to Sissoko because I know how people's minds will work and they'll start thinking, oh my God, another Sissoko. But when I mean he's got the Sissoko thing, it's more in terms of his versatility. He's a guy that can play in the centre of the pitch. That's probably his main preferred position. But he can play on the right of midfield. He can play as a second striker. He can play as an attacking midfielder. He's very, very versatile. He's got a real engine on him. He can dribble past players. He's really strong in the tackle. Essentially, bringing him in kind of plugs that Sissoko gap for the next 3 months or so. Obviously, he's going to have to adapt, as all kind of foreign players coming into Premier League do. But long term, if they see enough out of him to make that deal permanent, I think some of the figures talking about it, something like around 30 to 35 million euros that have been mentioned. Then it's a very Spurs signing. He really is. He's a very young player, plenty of potential, lots of resale value if they want to do that down the line, if they make it permanent, of course. I think it's a good signing. It's probably not an area I'd say Spurs desperately need out of all of the possible transfers they could bring in. However, if it's a low-cost loan deal for now with future kind of financial implications, then why not? The opportunity has arisen. Looks like they're going to beat West Ham for him. Chelsea been linked to him as well. He hasn't been playing as much this season. Had apparently a little bit of a falling out with the manager, been the head coach at Benfica. So that's why he hasn't really been playing too much. So if he's going to come to time, he's going to be playing for a compatriot in Mourinho, one of the best in the world. Mourinho knows him inside out and what his game's about. And he'll be a guy that will just add that extra kind of bit to the team. Personally, I do hope it doesn't stall Oliver Skipp's development. I would like Skip to get some minutes. If not at Spurs, then let him have a bit of a loan somewhere for the second half of the season. But he may well end up being more of the 1 yard. It's a tough one. He's not really a defensive midfielder. That's not what he is. I would say probably the Sissoko roles, the energy, the drive, the midfield engine is probably more what you're looking at with Gedson Fernandes. Let's talk about another Fernandes, Bruno Fernandes. Oh no, he would be an absolutely perfect fit for Spurs. Anyone that's read my stuff or heard me talking about him before, this guy is superb. Mourinho loves him. Spurs and Mourinho would love to bring in Bruno Fernandes. They'd almost done the deal in the summer. Everything had been agreed with the player, but there was just issues with Eriksen not moving on, and they'd tied up the Celso, and it was just one of those where, you know how Spurs are. They're worried that they're going to end up with end up with all three of them and end up paying 3 lots of wages and not being able to get rid of Eriksen. And that's the way they operate. They obviously operate in a business when it comes to stuff like that, more than the way a football club the fans would want it to be run, more like a football manager kind of thing. But he's superb. I'd say if there's going to be a straight shootout with Manchester United for him, certainly there seems to be a little bit of fear within Spurs that obviously United, with the financial muscle they've got, that's where they can sway this. But let's see. I mean, certainly I've heard little rumblings about possibly Foyth going the other way in a loan deal to Sporting to give him a little bit more experience as well of getting a real run of first team football, which might be good for him. Obviously, he's going to different language, different culture. Obviously, speak Portuguese rather than Spanish, as Foyth does. But I'd be, again, another one. I'd be sad to see Foyth go because I do think there's a player in there. I think he's got mistakes in him which he has to iron out. But I still think he's a very talented kid. But maybe that's what he needs, that little loan move. But as I say, Man United obviously going to be the biggest roadblock in it because Man United are desperate. Maybe Spurs are as well, but Man United have got the funds to kind of match that desperation, whereas Spurs don't. So keep an eye on it, but probably don't get too excited about it. And I'd love to. They're looking at him. They're looking at him. That's about as much as you can kind of go on that. So right back, Kyle Walker-Peters. Quite a few clubs interested in him. Crystal Palace look to be the one that are going to lead the way. Roy Hodgson's obviously come out and said they're very keen to do a deal to bring him in. At the moment, it's a bit unclear whether it's a loan or a permanent move. Hodgson seemed to be indicating that at first it was a loan, that perhaps it's now kind of switching towards a permanent move, which is incredibly sad for me because and for many people that kind of have seen a lot of Walker-Peters coming through the youth, the academy. I felt he's never really had that run of games and his confidence has dipped accordingly. I'd prefer to be a loan because I really think that even if from a business point of view, he'll come back with more value than when he went away. I do believe that he could be a real success for Palace. He could be their next Wan-Bissaka. I think Hodgson clearly does very well with right back. So let's see what happens there. But he's definitely, I think, will be on the way. And I just hope it's more temporary than permanent. Spurs, if they're going to replace him, they would look to replace him. Preference is to bring in another British player because You obviously, Spurs have still got to be very wary of that trap as they were of in falling into having too many foreign players in the team. They had an absolute nightmare with that about 2 years ago, wasn't it? So if you're going to lose a British player in Carl Walker-Peters and a homegrown academy one and that as well, then they're looking at the likes of obviously Norwich's Max Aarons. They've looked at West Brom's Nathan Ferguson as well, very talented young player. But the big issues with both of those is obviously Norwich are fighting relegation. They're not going to want to lose one of their prize assets. West Brom looking to get into the Premier League. Again, not looking to lose one of their prize assets. Ferguson's an incredibly talented young boy. Well, Aarons is as well. Anyone that's seen him, he's been... His stats in most of like the tackling, crossing, things like that are right up there in the Premier League. Ferguson is very versatile. He can play right back, play left back, he can play in the centre of defence as well. Both would be a real investment in the future. I think for Spurs it will be a case of looking to see. It's the fees. This is the problem with the January window. Is we'd love to see Spurs making these additions, but unfortunately, especially allied with the fact that people know that Spurs are a bit desperate at the moment, as we were saying earlier, prices just hiked up. And on top of that, British prices for British talents, you are looking at silly money. But keep an eye on that. If Walker-Peters goes, they're going to have to replace. The options aren't there not to, really, are there? Because you've only got Aurier then. He doesn't believe in Foyth as an attacking right back. You'd have to change the system then, maybe switch it to the other side so that Sessegnon on the left would then be the one without the defensive duties in that system. And then then it's all a bit mix and match, isn't it? You've got people like Dyer that could play there. They need another right back to stop the waffle. They need another right back if Walker-Peters goes. So keep an eye on that. Obviously, AC Milan striker Krzysztof Piatek. Spurs are interested in him. The key over him is going to be the price. He had a terrific season last season, 30 goals in all competitions. Started off, I think it was Genoa, wasn't it, before he went to Milan. This season, slightly dropped down the pecking order a little bit despite that great season. Ibrahimovic has just come in now as well. I think if Spurs could get a deal for under 30 million, then I think they'd probably go for it. Again, I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to get some kind of loan first to trial him out. But obviously AC Milan are probably not going to want to do that unless there's an obligation to buy at the end of it. It would be a very interesting, different kind of striker signing in a way, because you've had Vincent Janssen before. Was he 22? I think he was when he signed for Spurs. Young, relatively untested striker. Obviously top scorer in the Eredivisie, but that's without being too harsh on the Dutch leagues. It's a little bit of a different standard. Then you've got the other side of the scale. You've got Fernando Llorente, very experienced and happy to be a backup. Piatek would be a little bit different in that he's 24 years old. He's had a terrific season in one of Europe's top leagues, and obviously has something about him that, yeah, it's one of those. I think Mourinho made the statement he came out with the other day. He said the January market is about not going out in the market. It's more about the market coming to you, and it's a market of opportunity. And if opportunities arise, then go for them. And I do wonder whether Piatek, if he's available for a decent price, then why not? I think it's quite an interesting theme. Maybe some Spurs fans will be worried by it, but the fact that a lot of these targets are linked with West Ham first. The Piateks, Gedson Fernandes, Max Aarons, I think, has probably always been a Spurs target. Maybe Arsenal as well. I think we looked at him as well. But, yeah, I mean, there's others as well. I mean, I know they've been offered, certainly, the chance of potentially signing Christian Benteke, which is one of those where I think if you're a fan, you're immediately like, oh my God, because you look at the lack of goals and he's had an absolute mare in that respect. And also the fact that Spurs, I think, were looking to sign him 5-6 years ago, when he was absolutely at his prime and smashing them in for Villa, and then was it Liverpool he went to after that, wasn't it? I think if you're going to go for Benteke, despite the fact it's probably the most incredibly unsexy signing Spurs have maybe ever made, he would probably do the job in terms of a battering ram up front that would bring others into play, the Llorente role. But he's not going to get you goals. You could maybe argue he'll get possibly more chances at Spurs, so you never know. He may rediscover his goal-scoring touch. But in terms of just having a big lump up front, he would fill that role. But then again, it would really depend on the price, because they're not going to pay any sort of decent money for him whatsoever. I think they maybe, like I say, for Petr Cech, I think under 30 million they probably would. 24 years old. I think Benteke is about 29 now. They're not really going to go down that road with him. I saw one report today saying about Llorente possibly coming back. I wouldn't rule it out. I wouldn't rule it out bringing him back from Napoli for the sake of 4 or 5 months or so, a bit like they did with Vorm. I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but I'd say it probably seems more unlikely than other options. So yeah, I mean, in terms of outgoings, obviously we've got Eriksen. I think Victor Wanyama, he's just not even in consideration, is he, right now? Foyth, I think the fact that he was there yesterday as a 19th man and Tanganga's getting in the team ahead of him, I wouldn't be stunned if there's a loan move for him. Like I said, Sporting, if they could convince Sporting to take him and take a whack off of the Bruno Fernandes fee, if Man United don't get him, then I can understand that one. Walker-Peters, obviously, as well. Ultimately, it's what you believe Spurs will do. We know Spurs are not big movers and shakers in a January window, but ultimately, Mourinho's also said it's about reacting to who goes and having to replace them. And if Eriksen does go, if Wanyama does go, if Walker-Peters does go, and if Foyth goes, you're going to have to make moves to replace those players. And you've got, obviously, the Kane injuries and Sissoko injuries as well to think about. You know, Sissoko, we know, isn't going to be back to early April. Kane, they've said April. They haven't said early April. You know, that's just a training. Will he even be back for a match this season? Who knows? You could even get the incredibly unlikely scenario of him returning for a Champions League final again. You never know. Odds are against it in terms of Spurs probably being in the Champions League final again, but you never know. So keep an eye though. Spurs are looking to do deals, and I think that's the biggest thing to take away from it, which is probably more, you know, certainly what they haven't been probably looking to do in recent previous January windows as well. So it may be that circumstances could actually help benefit them going forward in the long term with some younger players for the future as well, who will, you know, help them out in seasons to come, not just these tricky 3, 4, 5 months or so. So yeah, pretty much that's it. Other than Middlesbrough on Tuesday night, we've got a press conference tomorrow. I'd hope personally we see Lo Celso, Lamela start. I'd imagine Dyer and Vertonghen will come into the team. I'd like to, as many people would, see Troy Parrott get some minutes. And as I've said, despite saying about Vertonghen coming back in, I'd really like to see that back three given another run out just to keep kind of getting the evolution of it going. It's a game that Spurs should win. That doesn't mean they will, because this is Tottenham Hotspur. But they've got enough about them to do the job. Middlesbrough very organised, played incredibly well in the first game. It's not going to be an easy one at all. But like I say, some little green shoots of recovery and some positive stuff amid the disappointment of defeat yesterday. So let's see where that and the transfer business over the next, couple of weeks take us. So I shall catch you later in the week. Let's see what happens with Tottenham Hotspur.